We are talking about the Synod. Pope Francis, hopefully you're aware, has called an ordinary General Assembly, the Synod of Bishops, which will take place in October this year, which, by work of the Holy Spirit, he has called on the topic of young people, faith and vocational discernment, which obviously dovetails beautifully with our own Year of Youth in a call to listen to and respond to the needs, thoughts and concerns of young people. So at the Synod itself will be attended by bishops, and so the process of the Synod has included trying to collect the voice of young people in the process. So we've seen already an international survey of young people that was conducted by the Vatican. We also had a survey that was conducted by the Australian Catholic bishops, which also fed into diocesan reports that were done across Australia and a national report to feed into that information for the Synod. We had a young woman, Ashley Green, has attended an earlier gathering of young people in Rome, and then most recently, which is what we're discussing tonight, from the 19th to the 24th of March, we had a group of young people at a pre-synod gathering in Rome, including Mark and Angela, who are online tonight. So just reading from the document about that meeting, the purpose of the pre-synodal meeting to take place in Rome from the 19th to the 24th of March 2018 is to provide the opportunity for young people to produce a document which expresses their view on the state of things, their ideas, their feelings and their recommendations to be presented to the Sydonal Fathers who will meet in October 2018 to treat the topic Young People, the Faith and Vocational Discernment. Approximately 300 young people representing young people from the 5 continents participated in this meeting. So unfortunately, because of our technical difficulties, we didn't have a lot of time to have you spend in the foyer, which had a link to that document, but it was emailed to you and you may have already read it yourself earlier on. But just to give us an idea, and this is not marked to say who are the good people who have read it or not, but just to give us an idea, how familiar are you with that Synod document that came from that most recent meeting of young people in Rome? So the options there is that you've read it in its entirety, you've had a bit of a browse, you've heard about it but maybe not looked at it, maybe you've read some reviews or comments online but haven't actually read it yourself, or maybe you've never heard of it. So that just gives us a bit of an idea there, which is pretty good. Obviously, most of you have some kind of idea about it. Even a few people have read the entire document or at least have had a little bit of a look at it. So we are in good standing there. So thank you very much for that. So I'm now going to introduce you to Angela and Mark, who were at that meeting in Rome, to share with us a bit more. And Mark Lysaght is going to speak with us first. So welcome, Mark.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Rochelle and Gabrielle and Malcolm for this special webinar. So I thought it might be helpful to sort of try and draw a picture with words what the pre-synod that Angela and I were a part of, so from the 19th to the 24th of March. First one, how did we actually find ourselves there? So Angela was there as a representative of the Australian Catholic Bishops Conference. For myself and 2 students that were representing, we were there from Australian Catholic University as representatives for the Congregation of Education in Rome. So ACU has a very good connection, and then we were asked to have a couple of students and a staff member, and I was the staff member, so a professional going into the room to be there. The 2 students that we had from the university were Steffi Santos, who's majoring in theology, and Lachlan Tompkins, who I see is online here tonight, who's an education student. Who else was in the room of the 300 that were there? We had everyone from every sort of region and continent of the world represented, and it wasn't just those that were Catholic, but from every other major religion. So Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, people of no faith, and also professed atheists, young people there. There's a gentleman, young Italian guy that I spent a bit of time with, who was doing some extraordinary work with young people on the streets from a purely humanitarian view. But his thoughts and ideas were really sought within this particular gathering. And so the pre-synod began on the Monday with the arrival of Pope Francis, and I'll let your imaginations run wild with what that looked like, with a whole bunch of young people trying to capture selfies with Pope Francis as he walked down the aisle. He spent 3 hours with us. It was really quite extraordinary. He began by speaking to us about wanting to make sure that we made our voice heard and very clear within the groups, and I'll talk about the groups shortly. But it started off with representatives of the continent or regions around the world speaking about the state of young people and what was happening in those particular regions for them. I think a standout of that was Angela and what she presented, and it would be, if you haven't seen that, it's worth going on to the Synod website or to the Facebook site and having a look at what Angela had to say. She represented Australia incredibly well, but she also represented Oceania extremely well. So bringing a really good overview of where we find ourselves and some really good commentary to that. The ongoing from that, there were questions that were posed to Pope Francis from several young people. One of the standout questions was a young Nigerian woman who's now based in Italy, but she wanted to ask the question on human trafficking. And the reason it probably stands out in my mind so clearly, and I think for so many people in the room, is that she really dropped a bombshell when she actually disclosed to all of us there that she had been trafficked from Nigeria at 11 years of age to Italy, and then said that the clientele that she had were 90% baptized Catholics, of which the Pope went on to reiterate. Now, that's not hard to get to in Italy because of the Catholic background, but that was one of the things that was said in that. And the Pope went on to very clearly articulate and speak into that space, as he did to all the questions. And he did this in a way that was quite unique. He used a lot of analogies and humor as he described things that he was trying to get across, but always pointing very, very centrally back to Jesus Christ and what that means for us and how we should go about it. As we moved from there, we actually got split up into our language groups. So there were 20 language groups, 9 of which were English-speaking language groups. The others were made up of Italian, Spanish, and French. And so particularly the Spanish and French groups made up of colonies from around the world that made up those groups. Obviously, Italy was Italians there. But the English-speaking groups then made up the rest of the world. And so you had really quite a unique group from Europe through to Asia, the Middle East, Oceania, ourselves. So that was quite an extraordinary experience as we went into the groups. You'll see, hopefully from the email attached today, the booklet that we were all given as part of it. So we got sent an email version of that, and then we were all given a little booklet that we could then draw upon. Within that were the questions. Now, it was based out of a YCW model, which was See, Judge, Act, Cardine model. For a lot of the young people in the room, in my experience, is that they hadn't heard of the YCW or the See, Judge, Act model and didn't know that. But I think it served really well for where we would start to go. Out of those English groups, for the next sort of from the Monday through to the Wednesday, we spent going through each of the questions that were there. So part 1, the challenges and opportunities of young people in the world today. Part 2 being faith, vocation, discernment, and accompaniment. And the third part, the church's formative and pastoral activity. So we spent a lot of time from 7 a.m. in the morning. Our day would start with mass and breakfast, and then all of a sudden we'd be working through until about 7:30 in the evening. Now, there is a siesta that was part and parcel of that experience for us. But they were long days, and we really didn't see or would go sightseeing anywhere until sort of Wednesday. We were locked in rooms, talking, chatting, going through things. On Wednesday, what happened is that there was a selection of the actual writing group, and they were representatives out of the the language groups that were put forward, and there was a couple of selection criteria. One needed to be proficient in the language of the group that you were in, and it was advantageous if you also had another language. And there were many in the room that had anywhere from 2 to 4 languages from around the world, which was really quite extraordinary. And also the acknowledgement that you're going to be working many more hours than everybody else up until the late Saturday evening. During that time, from sort of Wednesday through to Friday, there were 2 drafts that were presented to the group. The first draft came it was all printed out and given to each person. We sat there silently going through the first draft, and that had been a culmination of all of the language groups sending back their feedback and their answers to the questions. And so they had to synthesize all that material along with online material that was coming back into it. So that was quite the ordeal for the writing groups. The first draft was only 6 pages, and we were given the opportunity as a group, and a large group, the 300 of us gathered there, to actually make comment to the document. So there were lining up of people to a microphone on either side of the room to do 2 things: 1, a positive comment about a document, and 2, maybe a negative or somewhere that you think it needed to go. And there was to be no more commentary other than that. So once again, I'll let your imaginations run wild with how that actually worked. So they had to shut that down several times just to get the people through in the time frame that we had for that. We were then given the document to go back to then talk about what would happen and then offer more suggestions to that. And likewise, we did that with the second draft. The second draft was actually read in its entirety to the group, and then we went back and ratified and gave more suggestions to what was happening in there. It would be honest to say that in the group, not everyone was happy with what they've seen in the first draft, the second draft, or even that of the third and final copy of the document. But there was a majority consensus that the document was picking up what it had to say. I think it's really important that the first page of the document in what is read there it very clearly articulates that this is about the experience of young people and the 300 and those online that put into the experience about what they are experiencing on the ground. It wasn't about theological understandings or changing teachings of the church or any of those sorts of things, but to really give an understanding to the bishops of what is actually happening on the ground. Now, they are very different situations for us here in Oceania to Europe, to the Middle East, to Asia. There are very different things going on in every aspect of that. So just a few comments for me about it from my own personal experience. An extraordinary experience to be there with the people, and particularly as a professional looking into what was happening for young people and trying to get an understanding of what their experience is for them. A couple of things that I'd highlight. Undervaluing of the Sacraments came through highly for a lot of people, and they came at different outcomes. So say from the West, what we're experiencing is an undervaluing of sacraments because of 2 or 3 generations of families that are no longer, or people no longer, practicing the faith. In the Middle East, what you'll see that clearly pointed out in the formation of personality in point 1, is that in the Middle East it's more about peer pressure and being part of the majority that's there. So in that case, the Muslim faith, and not wanting to be outside of that. And so you get the same resulting of the undervaluing the sacraments, but from 2 very different constructs. The other big thing was the loss or the displacement of peoples around the world. So we see that in refugee operations that we're seeing here in Australia, but particularly with those coming out of the Middle East and etc. into Germany. So we had a German member as part of our English-speaking group, and he was talking about the loss of what they articulated, losses of tradition and heritage, but they articulated it as loss of memory. He comes from Bavaria, and the concern that the Muslim faith will come in, and because even of just the fertility rate, they would lose their tradition and their faith because of that going through. If we take the experience here in Australia, there's 196 countries in the world, of which 190 are represented in Australia alone. So we have quite an extraordinary experience from there. The other thing that is important to mention, and you'll see under the heading of point 12, young leaders, and there's 2 sentences. The church must involve young people in its decision-making processes and offer them more leadership roles. These positions need to be in parish, diocesan, national, and international, even a commission to the Vatican. And maybe Malcolm or others might talk to this, but those four last words, commission to the Vatican, can't be understated in how important that might be, because that doesn't currently exist for young people in Rome. There are certain areas where that comes out, and under different congregations and ecclesiastical appointments in Rome, but to have that would be quite extraordinary. So that's a very, very big statement in the document. The other thing would be to point out the instruments to be used. And so if I just grab the document in front of me here, you'll see it in point number 15. It says, however, we are passionate about the different expressions of the church. Some of us have a passion for the fire of contemporary and charismatic movements that focus on the Holy Spirit. Others are drawn towards silence, meditation, and reverential traditional liturgies. There was some conjecture around the world in regards to why wasn't the extraordinary form mentioned explicitly. I had some time with a gentleman from Hungary who's very much part of the movement of the extraordinary form. And he would say, well, where does it stop? If you're going to mention everyone, why don't you need to mention Byzantine Rite? You'll need to mention, all other traditions, and Chaldean Rite would be one of the things that Angela could speak into that space. So I thought that was good commentary, that it was actually mentioned, the reverent liturgies, but also the charismatic. So there were many different things happening. So I could go on for a lot more, and I won't, but that just kind of gives you an overview of what was happening in the room. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that, Mark. And I know we did have him on quite a tight timeline, and there is much more that he could speak to. And we will hopefully have some more time for that in the discussion to actually discuss the document or some of those points if you've got questions a little bit more. But to keep moving on, we will go straight into Angela. So we would like to welcome Angela joining us from Melbourne this evening. Thanks, Angela.
Hello everyone. I'm Angela Markas from Melbourne. I'm a student of the MTeach program at Melbourne University. I was selected by the Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Anthony Fisher. It was quite an experience to begin with. I don't know where to begin. To be honest with you, the selection process was quite crazy in that sense. I was at church one day, and a friend of mine, a youth group leader, previous youth group leader, came up to me and said, Angela, we'd like to put your name down for up for selection. Would you be okay with that? And I said, okay, sure, after a week or two. And from there, it just went to our Archbishop, to our Bishop in Sydney, and Bishop Minuna, and then Bishop Minuna put a very lovely letter for my selection, and there we went. From there, Anthony Fisher, Archbishop Anthony Fisher, selected me, and everything really was quite bizarre from then. Representing Australia is quite a scary task. I didn't know where to begin. To be frank with you, I've been in the Chaldean Rite my whole life. My parents were born in Iraq, and I was born in Australia, but my Chaldean community is a big part of who I am. I'm very proud to be Chaldean, but I'm also very proud to be Australian. So it's a very interesting selection, and I think it's very clever as well, because having someone like me there from the Eastern Rites to represent that side, and then having someone like Mark there representing the Roman Rites, it was very interesting to have both sides there. And it's a testimony to show how diverse our Catholic communities are in Australia, which is great, really, really cool. So I did a speech in front of the Pope when I was there. I didn't know how that I would be doing the speech in front of the Pope. Ashley Green, the girl that went before me, represented Australia in the previous meetings, said to me that the Pope never really appeared. They never really met the Pope, but in the end, I did the speech representing Oceania in front of the Pope and some cardinals over there, and it was quite phenomenal, really, really phenomenal. I couldn't feel my legs when I was up there speaking to the whole crowd of 300 people from all around the world, and the Pope there. So if you watch the video, you'll see me stutter and very nervously, like trying to look around. I turned around and I saw him there. Before I could even kiss his hand, he was there, and it was crazy. Like, honestly, we have a wonderful, wonderful Pope. He was the one who tried to make the first step. He's honestly everything you imagine him to be. So lovely, so kind, really, really humble. He really wants to immerse himself with the youth, which is really lovely. I said in one of my reflections on Facebook, he actually looked at us in the eyes and like really wanted to see us for who we were. So it was really crazy. Just a little bit of background for those who don't know. The Chaldean Rite is an Eastern Rite from Iraq. In Australia, we have 5 non-geographical rites. Some of them are Melkites, Maronites, Chaldean, Assyrian churches. Basically, the Chaldean Rite, it's the Chaldeans, Babylonia. It's a very traditional rite. For example, our whole mass is traditionally sung. It's very different from the Roman Rite in that sense, Roman Latin Rite. Another difference is, for example, confirmation and baptism are done at the same time, at the beginning as a baby, and later on you don't do confirmation again. Yes, those are some differences, but there's heaps more. These are just some that are coming to mind now. But I would love to talk about them some other time. Just moving forward and talking about the actual pre-synod, Mark really summed it up quite well. He explained the process and everything. I would love for you to have a look at the document, because the document is meant to be something that comes out of the youth and addresses the issues of the youth to the bishops in the meeting in October. So we still have an opportunity to express what we would like to emphasize for our Archbishop Anthony Fisher to take with him, and Bishop Edwards with him to Rome in October. So it'd be really great if you had a look at that document, reflected on it with your parish members, and then gave us some feedback about what you think it means for us. I think I don't want to say what is included and what's not included in the document, because I think it needs to reflect your parish. But I think some things to highlight and some things that you can pick up on and see if they really are significant and are worthy points to talk about. For example, the role of women, to begin with, the role of women in the church. I mean, I come from the Middle Eastern culture, so obviously we inherit a lot of resistance around men and women and their roles in the church. The role of women in our discussions and in the document is very emphasized. It's integral to our church life. And like, I was talking to a friend of mine just before, and she said, look, if you empower women, you're empowering the church. So it's good that we're trying to empower women from all the sides of the world, but you need to really reflect on your parish community and see if it means something for you guys. Another thing is the role of men in the church. From our discussions, we didn't really focus on the role of men. I don't know. I was talking to someone else about it, and I was saying to them, when you're there and you're representing Australia, for example, or representing the whole world, and you're 300 people and you're young, so you get caught up in the moment, and you want to, once you have an idea and once you see something that is worth talking about, you want to delve further and further in. And sometimes you don't get enough time to discuss other just important aspects of our church life. So I feel like the role of men and how we can, the challenges and opportunities of men that come through the church and outside the church was somehow missed in this opportunity. But like I said, have a look and see if this is a place of discussion for your community. Areas under this point include following vocation and priesthood and becoming brothers in marriage and fatherhood. It's the idea of really becoming a man, and I know this is an important point for Australia because of the mental health issues associated with men and women, but men as well. The idea, this vision of masculinity and everything that around that. So it's good to have a look at these points. Another thing is just following off that mental health issues. Mental health issues was ranked #1 in our pre-Synod Australian survey, which 15,000 Australians took part in. So obviously this is a priority for us. It was discussed around in our discussions over there, but in the document it's also discussed as well. But there needs to be more discussion for Australia, I feel, because it's such an important part of our culture, of our society. We need to really understand and embrace young people, no matter where they come from. And like the document says this, we need to provide avenues to assist them in their healing. So to assist us in our healing. So we need a church that really tends to these people. Another point is that I found interesting was understanding of our sexuality. A reality of Australian culture is sexuality diversity. I mean, we will confront this in our schools and all platforms of our work life. So there's a lot of things to tackle here. In my personal discussion over there, it was in my personal language group. So it was discussed, but not to great extent, and I can say that honestly. So I feel that young people really desire an inclusive church, and one that opens its doors to all members, all the marginalized. We really want a church that is boundless. And for example, it's not about changing the teachings, but it's more about how can we enable people to perceive the church as something that doesn't leave anyone behind, as somewhere where everyone is called by their name. So it's really important to really look further than where we're at now. Let me just look at my notes. Yeah, and I just said here, like, our strength, I think young people really desire a strong church. We don't desire a weak church. So the idea that we refuse people from seeing Jesus just because they may be gay or, practice that lifestyle, we want one that loves without condition. And that's the calling of our faith, really. We have to go back to would Jesus really deny someone of that sexual orientation? I don't know. Like, all of these questions become really important. One last thing, I know I'm out of time, and I know that I don't want to be running out of our schedule, but one last thing is this experience really taught me how to share my joy with other youth. It was so surprising on all levels. And I think it was really important that it wasn't a discussion only to transmit or to give out intel on what youth are experiencing on the ground, but it was also an opportunity for young youth to really be embraced by the church. There was something really powerful about our spirit, of a youthful spirit, that just wanted to crave to be around each other and just to share our joy as a community. It was really, really wonderful to be part of. I've written some reflections on Facebook if anyone has time to read 2,000 words or whatever, but really, like, it was an amazing opportunity. And like I was saying to Malcolm just yesterday, no words, no pictures can ever fully encapsulate my feelings over there, because it was just beyond anything I've ever experienced in my life. And Malcolm said it'll take years and years and years for me to understand that. So I look forward to it. But for now, I'll just give it back to Rachel. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Angela, and yeah, thank you for your passion and the way that you speak. And I think we can all tell that you did an amazing job representing Australia in Rome. So thank you so much for that, and thank you, Mark, also for your input and the way in which you participated on behalf of the country and ACU in Rome. So what we're going to do now is have a bit of a discussion. So both Angela and Mark can add any bits that they need as well. And there's a few thanks coming through to Angela and Mark. So thank you for those comments. We are going to, I'm just going to let you know the questions. So you can see in the discussion. Note there. The first question I'm going to throw to you: what parts of the document, if you've read it, and if not, from what Mark and Angela have said tonight, what parts resonate strongly with you? What parts do you, from your work with young people, do you think are important and reflected in what's been said and in the document? Whilst you think about that and how you can respond, and the brave person who goes first, I'm just going to explain to you how it will work. So again, in the top bar of your window, you can see an icon with, looks like a person with their hand raised. If you click on the downwards pointing arrow next to that, it'll give you a drop down menu, and you can do things like raise your hand, agree, disagree, step away, those kinds of things. If you are happy to have your microphone turned on to contribute to the discussion, could you just raise your hand so we can see? And then when that happens and it's your turn, we will enable your microphone, and you will see come up in that same bar at the top where that icon with the person with their hand raised, little microphone. And if you click on that, it will turn green and you will be able to speak. If you're having trouble with that, you can put a comment in the Q&A box below. You can hopefully see below there. You can put comments there to let us know that you are happy to speak, or if you have something to say. If you'd like to speak to us directly, in the top right hand corner of that box, there's a little button that says pod options. If you put your cursor over it, and if you click on it, you can see there's an option there that says start chat with, and you can go host, and that will send us a private message if you need to. So let me just move so I can see everyone. Okay, so we need someone to go first. So please raise your hand or put it in the Q&A box there if you would like to share something of your thoughts on that. And whilst we're doing that, I know it's going to take a little bit for someone to be brave enough to put up their hand first, but I'm hoping someone does. But I might invite Angela and Mark to turn your cameras back on so we can see you, and you can respond to any questions that people might have, or comments that people might have. Whilst we're waiting for someone to be very brave, might have to send out like a special prize or something to someone who puts their hand up first to give us a comment on anything that resonated with them in what you've said. But there was a question that came through whilst we were speaking from James, who said that there were quite a few people in the Pre-Synod Facebook group, and it might be worth talking about what that was.
Yeah, thanks, Rochelle. I certainly heard that commentary as well. what's unfortunate for me is that I sit outside of the age bracket that was allowed to actually be in that Facebook group. So it's a bit difficult for me to actually talk concretely about what was not represented in that, because I wasn't able to see some of the commentary. So, James, if you've got any examples of that, that would be extremely helpful. And we could then try and make comment to that. I know that from the online commentary that was made by the event organisers that were there, they were dealing with some thousands of commentary and that were being expressed through Facebook or other online mediums that were coming through into the synod. So there's and I know that there was commentary, particularly in the US, about some things that weren't being explicitly that people didn't feel that they were represented in. So if there's any sort of concrete sort of things, Angela and I might be able to make comment to that, but that's really where all I can make comment to at this point in time.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I wasn't part of the Facebook group until after the synod was all over, the pre-synod was all over, only because I think they were really busy and they didn't, by the time they accepted the people who had been added to the group while we were there, it took a long time. So I was added to the group after, and for some reason I couldn't see the comments or the posts on it. Maybe they were the date had gone by or something. It's really interesting because when you read all the criticisms online, and for example, I read criticisms about the speech as well, the speech that I gave from Oceania. All of these people are coming from different places of the world, and they all have a voice to say. They all have something to say. So, and their own view of the situation. And it's difficult to address those points because I think the questions that we were asked were different, slightly different to the questions they were asked. So we were focusing on two different things at the same time. For example, I know that they had hashtags to associate the discussions with, but we didn't have hashtags, we just had questions. So it was a different construction of ideas. Our document was just mainly in response to the questions that we were given, whereas they had a different format, I think, of answering back to the questions. So I think we have to take this into consideration. Other than that, we know that this is not a perfect document. We know that this isn't all-encompassing and it's not complete, but like I said before, when you're there and you're representing the whole world in a small subset of people, you just, I don't know, this weird thing happens to you and this momentum carries on. And I don't know if Mark felt it, but it's really difficult to come back and look at the whole picture again when you've gone down one path and then address everything else at the same time. Sometimes you forget about other things, and then it's only until you get back to your reality, you're like, oh wow, this is a big thing for my country, and we haven't even addressed this in a document. The point of sexual diversity for me was a very big shock when I came back. So yeah, I think that we have we have time to improve as well before our Archbishop goes to the actual synod in October. So it'd be cool to get thoughts and responses about that.
Thanks. I'm just picking up on a few things in terms of the question on what part of the document resonates strongly with you, and a couple of comments that have been made in the Q&A box there. So, do
you want me to go first, Mark? I think, for example, I'll give you an example. One of our other Australian delegates over there, Jonathan Vala, he's a seminarian studying to be a priest, hopefully, in Rome. He said that he had an interesting experience with his language group when they were discussing the very first part of the document, the very first set of questions. Their group instantly was divided between the dividing and the developing and the developed world, just because some people viewed that the real issues that their youth encountered weren't as significant as the real lifestyles of the other world. So you had people from the Middle East, for example, or Asia or whatever, say you guys don't have real problems, and then you have people from Australia or America and so forth, and so Europe say, no, like we have other issues. And this is an important point for me to go into the pre-synod, because we have completely different value systems between the two worlds, and it's difficult to embrace all of these things on one level, on one baseline, which is our foundation, the church. In my personal language group, we didn't discuss to great extent the issues of the depth, to great depth, the issues of mental health and how young people are really affected by it. And I found that I tried to bring it up a few times, but everyone was from a developed world in my country, in my language group, so it wasn't. There was a limitation to what we could discuss. Whereas other groups probably had a greater opportunity to do that. Mark, do you have something to say?
Microphone back on. I think the mental health question encapsulated so many areas, and as you rightly point out, Angela, I think the displacement of peoples, there's a number of things that are vying in. You could talk about drugs and alcohol, you talk about a whole number of different things, but I think the question that essentially it came around was the identity of young people. And we see the onset of mental health, particularly in young people from 15 to 25 years of age. And as a counsellor background in working in that field from time to time, that certainly, I see that, concretely here in Australia. But we're experiencing that right across the world. For example, the rise of artificial intelligence, for Pakistan and India and places like that, really pointed to, people that are looking for work and the human dignity that comes from that and the common good, etc. If you have loss of that and loss of hope or uncertainty about your future and where you're going, that contributes into a mental health situation. So when you read the document and you have a lens of mental health and you start to read through all of the little things that are coming through from the sort of the seed, judge, act model, you start to put all things together. If you tie in pornography, you tie in sexuality, you tie in artificial intelligence, you tie in a number of different things that are going on, you'll actually see that the mental health situation, while not explicitly, but it is in the document explicitly said around anxiety in a number of different areas, but it comes through in so many different forms, and it is something that young people are facing worldwide. It's not a Western problem by any stretch of the imagination, and it just has a different expression in the way that it's experienced. And like the Middle East, for example, when you're talking to the Middle East and particularly Syria and places like that, of the Christian groups that have been sort of almost eradicated, they've gone from 2.5 million Christians in that country, to 200,000. So 250 million to 200,000. So that's an extraordinary displacement and people being killed in that space. And you talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and a number of different things. They don't even diagnose with that. It's a living, walking reality for a lot of people in that space. So that would be my commentary around that.
Great, thank you both for that. I'm going to Mark.
I would say that Cardinal Baldessari, who's in charge of the synod process and putting it all together, was absolutely ecstatic about that, and he was having quite a few jokes. But he was also wanting that to come out. He sat in every session. He listened to what was happening, and there were, religious and clergy represented from the Secretariat and right across, very much involved. Obviously, Pope Francis's leadership to that. How does that then concretely manifest itself in the everyday life of a diocesan coordinator or a youth worker in the space? I think come down to the relationships that you have with, leadership that's on the ground and their understanding of how that intersects and works. So, you look at some commentary, you look at some, some priests and others that have made commentary on the document, and I suppose particularly for Angela and I, there's a broader perspective of that because we're looking for that material and we're seeing what people are making commentary on. There's divided thought from leadership about what this looks like and how this operates. I'd have to say that it's not necessarily coming from clergy; it's coming from other commentators in the space. But I think there's in regards to youth wanting more leadership, I think there's a number of things that need to be sort of put in place. I think there's, good formation of young people and how they then animate that and bring that out. And I think this is the work of the ACBC office for youth and also of archdiocesan, representatives and responsibilities, or diocesan representative responsibilities, and also a bit of other rights about how we are promoting and how we are skilling and bringing young people to be able to be in that leadership position and work co-responsibly with the leadership as we understand it within, at least for clergy and religious, within at least the Australian space.
Great, thank you. And I think something that's coming through in what both you are saying as you respond to these comments and questions as well is about how does this work in your local reality? So it's one thing about what was being said, what your experiences might have been for both Mark and Angela and what people have shared, but then how do we use this document to reflect what's happening in the local reality?
Angela, do you want to make a comment or?
Yeah, Mark, you go first. Actually, I'd like to see your perspective first. And all the perspectives.
I think the YCW model, I'll just go back to that for just to make some comment on that. The young people in the room didn't necessarily know the YCW model, so the See, Judge, Act model and how that works. So what we had is a whole stack of young people go in and look at all these questions and go, I'm going to see, I'm going to judge, and I'm going to really act on this, and away it goes. And you almost needed 2 days to sit with the issues that were coming out for young people and how they were wanting to express them, to then sit down with having sort of got that off their shoulders, to actually sit with the material and then start to look at the questions a little bit more succinctly. It's not to say that the document doesn't express us getting to that moment, but I think it would have been added some value to that. I mentioned to Archbishop Mark Coleridge in Brisbane the YCWC Judge Act model. He said, that's not a bad model to use. But if you don't know that model and you don't understand where that comes from, and it wasn't explicitly said, then that's a bit difficult. Do I think that these forums would be useful? I think if we go to Australia being 190 different makeups of countries around the world, our own opportunity to come and talk and speak with each other, I think my experience has been that we can be a little bit silo and divided in our operations at times. And so to actually come together, from Maronite to Chaldean, right through and express what's happening sometimes in our own individual communities, from Vietnamese, Filipino, we could go on and on, to then have that experience of the Australian church and how that's going about that. And it's not to say that that's not already exercised already in different ways, but certainly I think there's some value to that. I think it's a really good.
Yeah, just from my perspective, I think young people just want to connect. They really enjoy hearing other people's story. I mean, certainly me over there, I didn't get any sleep. I had like 4 hours of sleep, and I wasn't on the writing committee or anything, but whenever someone said, "Oh, Angela, let's go and do this," or "Angela, come, let's talk," or something, and these were people from all around the world. We just wanted to connect with each other, and maybe it was the excitement of the space, but I think young people all around the world just want to connect to each other, have that opportunity to connect to each other. I certainly feel that in my Chaldean community, we love to share our joy with other people, but then again, there's always this issue of, do we enjoy our joy more, or do we enjoy our joy? Do we enjoy our joy? Do we share our joy more with the members of our community first and then go out and preach, or do we go and find our joy with others and then come back? It's so different, because my Chaldean community is very it's stabilized on its identity, and their faith and the identity. Their faith is the identity, basically. It's so intertwined with that. But for other parishes, other communities, it may not be the same. It isn't the same thing. It's not the reality. That's not where they find their full identity. So it's interesting that I feel that youth from all around Australia. I've been to Australian Year Catholic Youth Festival here in Melbourne, and that was a wonderful time to connect with one another as well. It was just great to see people from all different parishes, no matter where you come from, just share each other's joy. And I think we can just thrive in these opportunities, I guess.
That's great. Thank you so much for both of your input on that. Thank you also to Michael for your comment going back to the conversation around clergy and leadership, and your enthusiasm and passion, because it's really great to pick up on these things that, there is a lot of positive responses around. So, yes, in faith and leadership.
I'll go first.
You want to go?
No problem. The first part of the document actually discusses family to a great extent. One thing that we haven't discussed in that part of the document is family diversity, which is very much alive in the real situation of Australia. This is crucial, I think, in our discussion, because we really desire to be able to connect with Christ no matter where they come from. So that includes whatever family construct they come from. And it's really important for us to recognize this and to be able to be more open than we already think we are. Have a look. I don't want to spoil it for you, but have a look at the document and see what it does say and what you think is represented in that part of the document, specifically the first part. I think it's actually the first section, the first question of the first part, and see if it really resonates with your parish community. If it doesn't resonate with the parish community, what questions do we need to ask? So that would be. I think that this is just a wonderful opportunity to instigate those questions. Mark, do you want to talk?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And I think it's a key question. To take some different language of what we would call domestic church. So the family and the church in that was absolutely valued as the first port of disseminating or handing on the faith. And so it was really keenly and strongly pointed out, and Angela rightly says right at the very beginning of the section, that there is what I was talking about, the loss of memory and loss of heritage and tradition that was being expressed as a result in that. And I think as a catalyst, because of the diversity experience that has been experienced, worldwide, but particularly in the West, coming through in that particular space. Well, if you also look I think it's preferred places, which is number 13, part of the document, I was really very happy to see this particular thing said. It says, while the church already meets many of us in schools and universities throughout the world, we want to see her presence in these places in a stronger and more effective way. Resources are not wasted when they are put into these areas, as these are places in which many young people spend most of their time and often engage with people of varied socioeconomic backgrounds. So as someone working in university ministry for Australian Catholic University, I saw that, and my wife, who's a teacher, went, absolutely. I think that's absolutely key within that space. So I think from how the church works in the school environment, obviously university in the context I'm talking about, but that very early age area was very much addressed within the document. It might take some reading into to see